Now the next thing I want to tackle is the position keyframes for this set of 3 images where we have the worker's hands holding the edges of the blueprint. I'm going to adjust my composition viewport size here. So I'm just going to click on the drop down in the lower left, and here I can select all sorts of different zoom factors. I'm just going to select fit up to 200%, and that way we can see a little bit bigger what's going on. So you can see here I've got this frame, and this frame. Those are all showing the worker's hands pulling out the blueprint. So I want it to be almost as if they're sort of unfolding this thing, and maybe that could go along with some sounds of unfolding paper. So let's play this back. And I'm finding when I want to sort of zero in on an area of my timeline like this, it's helpful to adjust this bar that is above my layers and below my time ruler. And that's called the work area. So this is helpful if we just want to export out a smaller section of our timeline, or if we're doing editing and we just want to look at one part or another and sort of not have to preview the parts that we're not working on. So I can just click and drag on the ends of that bar, and I can click and drag on the middle to move it around. If I've got a really long timeline, I can also use keyboard shortcuts. So if I want to set the beginning of the work area, I can hit the B key and it's going to line right up with my current time indicator. And if I want to set the end of the work area, I hit the N key on the keyboard. And so this way, when I either hit the space bar to preview or click play in the preview panel, I'm only going to see what's underneath that work area. And so you can see I have this frame which has no keyframes, this frame which just has a linear keyframe, and this frame which has some adjustments in the graph editor. So let's take a look at the middle one, and I'm using position keyframes to move this from one side of the screen to the other. So let's select that layer, hit P on the keyboard, and I'm going to show this in the graph editor. And while I'm at it, I can turn off these other factors that I'm not going to be graph editing anymore. So to see this position property in the graph editor, I'm going to click the little graph icon next to the property, then come up just sort of to the top and to the left of my time ruler, click the graph editor. And so I can see, if I zoom in here a little bit, what's happening with my position value. So both the X and the Y position are changing. So this is the starting value. As we move down the timeline, we're working towards the ending value. Now, there's certainly nothing wrong with sort of a linear transition like this. And what that's going to mean is we'll get a very even motion. Basically, the layer is going to be moving the same amount in the same direction every single frame. Now, if we want to look at a slightly different motion, let's look at the position for the next frame. And you can see on the graph editor, that looks a little bit different. And so let's play that back and see how it looks. So you can see the motion's a little bit different. It's a subtle difference, but it's definitely there, where we're starting out moving more slowly and we're moving more quickly towards the end. So we're sort of accelerating that motion. And to me, that seems a little bit more natural for something that, a human hand would do. And so I can tell, obviously, just by watching the image, I can tell by looking at this motion curve, because the points which represent each frame are spaced out in a different way at the beginning versus the ending. I can also look at the graph editor and I can see the way that these values are shown on the graph is different, right? So I can see the change, for example, if we're looking at in green here, the Y position, that's the vertical. You can see the change is going to start very slowly. As we move down the sequence, it's going to increase and then it's going to slow back down again. So that's an effect called easing, where we're adjusting the spacing of the motions, but not adjusting the timing, between start to finish. So let's go ahead and take a look at how we could convert some of these linear keyframes into eased keyframes. So I'd like to take off of the graph editor the keyframes from layer 5. And so those are these ones here that we see that are nonlinear. I'm just going to go ahead and click the little graph icon next to each of those X and Y position properties. And now you can see we're looking just at the position property of layer 4. So I'll go ahead and collapse layer 5 and we can look just at the keyframes for that one layer. Now, by default, when we take a property onto the graph editor that has multiple components, so for example, like position has 2 components, a horizontal component and a vertical component, by default they're locked together. And sometimes that's just fine. Other times, like in this case, we want to separate those properties. So I'm going to go ahead and select the keyframes that I'd like to deal with. So that's these 4 here, and I'll just click and drag and select those 4. Now down here at the bottom, I have an icon that gives me the option to separate those dimensions. So I'm going to click that. And now you can see I have a separate property, one for X position, which is horizontal, and one for Y position, which is vertical. That's going to let us have more flexibility in the way that we set easing on these keyframes. And I can already see there's a little bit of a difference in terms of not being completely straight lines from start to finish. Now from here, I can simply select any one of those keyframes, and I can either use some of the automatic options down at the bottom of my timeline panel. So for example, I could click the Easy Ease option, and there's ones to ease either the part of the animation leading out of the keyframe or into the keyframe or both. I can also use some of these conversion options to convert to a Bezier curve, and that's the same exact type of curve that you'd be drawing with in Adobe Illustrator. So if you've got some experience in Illustrator, that's going to carry right over into animating in After Effects. We could also convert back to linear, or we could use a hold, and so that is where the keyframe is going to maintain its property completely the same until it hits the next keyframe. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and try the Easy Ease, and let's do that on both of these leading keyframes. Let's go ahead and play back and see what that motion looks like. So I can see it's a little bit different, maybe not quite as dramatic of a change as I'd like. So I can either, with those Easy Ease keyframes set, I can do some adjustments here with the handle if I want to do something a little bit more intense in terms of the way that I'm shaping the animation curve from the first keyframe to the next. I can select all those and convert to Auto Bezier. Now when I click on any of these, I'll get a control handle leading off of the keyframe. And this I can take and click and drag, move it around, and you can see that really lets me fine-tune the spacing from the first keyframe to the next keyframe. And this is exactly how I was getting that easing effect that we looked at in the other clip, and I'll do the same thing here. And at first, this can be a little counterintuitive, but if we think about it again in terms of the rate of change that's happening over time, it starts to make a little bit more sense. So if we're starting here, you can see that curve stays more flat than vertical. And so that's telling me the motion is going to start off slowly. Then it's going to increase and get faster and faster and faster. You can see the jumps between each frame are getting bigger, and then it's going to slow back down. So let me adjust my work area just a little bit here. So you can see we get sort of that acceleration, that quicker velocity towards the middle of the clip, and the easing towards the first keyframe or the second keyframe. So that's one way we can implement easing or adjust the spacing of movement with the same timing from start to finish between keyframes.